There's a French-Swiss collaboration which believes they have found an anticoagulant which works but does not induce bleeding. And this is one of the most important things that is constantly a problem in stroke care and cardiac care, which is there is a thrombosis, there's a stroke. If we can't squish it out with a little pivot thing, we have to melt it chemically. And then that is done by preventing the clotting process. And that induces a willingness to bleed, which makes the problem much worse. So what these people did is they went after factor 12, which is the first factor in the sequence of clotting factors that induces a clot. And they developed an anti-factor 12 molecule, and they're testing it out in animals now. And it's working in animals. And they've also done it on transplants, which are believed to be perishable. So at a certain point, it's all or none. So they tried there, and it's working there. They said this would take some time to come into practical use. So maybe our grandchildren will have it. We probably won't have it in our lives, but it's coming, and that's very exciting. Now, on the kinky side, just to interrupt these sequential important things, there is a new cluster of toilets in the parks in Tokyo. Why is that news? Because you can see through them. And you'd say, oh my God, the Japanese have done it again. But actually, when you go in there, apparently the walls get cloudy and you can't see through the walls. So now the question comes up, do you have faith in this system, or are you going to be allowed to be shown crapping in the park? So I thought that was newsworthy because after all, you know, what's life about at this point? And they said, when I looked up the references that were aligned with this, they said there had been something like this in New York also, but I hadn't heard about that. So as far as I can tell, it's a first. All right, now at Stanford, they've introduced a process of trying to attack osteoarthritis. Osteoarthritis is the wear and tear version of arthritis. It's not an autoimmune disease. And their approach is that a mouse, and this is a mouse model where there was osteoarthritis in the mice to start with. And they drilled tiny little holes in the end of the bone, not to cure the mouse, but to introduce scarring, because they had discovered stem cells on the end of the bone were still present, but they weren't making cartilage, and they wanted them to make cartilage. So they started by doing something that would normally prevent scarring. And then while that was going on, they introduced two other chemical reagents. One is called Avastin, and alongside that was a morphogenetic powder. Both of these reagents came out of the laboratory I worked in when I was in medical school. I had nothing to do with these projects, but they got to be very big, and Avastin in particular found its use in tumors. It wasn't curative, but it could be used as an adjunct in the treatment of tumors. And the doctor who founded this whole thing would be disappointed, but he's dead, so it's okay. And it became a very popular drug. And now they're trying it in this cartilage regrowth scenario, because the idea is you turn off the vascular growth in the vicinity of these stem cells, and cartilage cells, bone cells and scarring cells can't do without the vascular support. So they turn it another direction and they develop cartilage. And that has worked. This is amazing. This is the beginnings of the signs of an approach to this could work. And those drugs are available. They've been approved. One is called morphogenetic bone powder. The other is called Avastin. Took place at Stanford, and this is their new sort of theoretical approach to osteoarthritis. Equally important, but also quite vague, there's an article in the New York Times titled, "Are Mammograms Worthwhile for Older Women?" So every few years, there's another article like this, and I must say, they never come to a clear conclusion. They cite one side, they cite the other side, they cite the studies get clear outcomes, but they're in conflict. And that seems to be the current situation. In other words, if you're over 75, maybe you shouldn't be taking these tests every year because the tumor you get might not be as lethal and you might die from something else first. So why go through all the schlep of getting tested and treated and so forth, and talking to your friends who tell you you're nuts if you don't have a mastectomy and blah, blah, blah. So this has been brought into question again. And it is a real consideration because there's a lot of older women that get cancer. But to give you another way of feeling for this, they did the test with a 6-year gap versus testing with a 1-year gap. And the testing with a 6-year gap actually showed fewer tumors on the mammogram. How could that be? Well, the 1-year interval led to all the tumors being discovered. And when you wait 6 years, a considerable number of them go away on their own. So that's why this is still a problem. All right, now the other thing is a follow-up on a story we had earlier about the Purdue Pharma, which we decided had struck a compromise. They had been fleecing the public by getting to take various drugs that they said were safe and they're not safe. So they had made some kind of conciliatory process with local authorities, but the feds are still after them. And the latest discussion with the feds indicates they are looking for an $18 billion settlement from Purdue Pharma, which has already been in bankruptcy the whole time anyhow. I don't know how they will get that money. The family seems to have protected itself with legal cleverness, and the corporation is bankrupt, but they want $18 billion. So we should all line up for our share of that, and that will solve the country's financial problems. Now, in Sweden, the great Sweden, there are two things there. One, the Swedish version of Dr. Fauci has come out and said that depending on masks alone is dangerous. And it's not clear if this is a translation bauble or if he actually meant and put all the emphasis on alone. In other words, he doesn't believe you should use the masks alone. It should be part of a whole constellation of efforts, which you know of, the distancing and so forth. But it's also interpretable that he thinks the masks themselves are a problem. And that hasn't been stated by other parties. The other story about Sweden is that they have not entered into a shutdown of their corporate life, and they have waited for enough people to get sick so that there is herd immunity, which is the goal of all of this. We don't seek it out by risking it, but we would like to have it. That's what might be taken care of by the vaccine, which doesn't exist yet. So they just let the thing run rampant. And they have herd immunity now, but they also have a very high death rate. And this relates back to these old people's facilities like we were talking about here. They said they sort of dropped the ball on that end and a lot of old people got sick. So their death rate is high, it's not the highest, and they're trying to fix that remaining part of the system. I think that'll that'll end it now. That's the end of my report for today. And thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Bill.